Hello, welcome to OBE. In superhero comics, readers are treated to an array of heroic and villainous characters wielding incredible abilities far beyond those of ordinary people. Most of us regard these stories as creative fiction. Is there more to comic book characters than meets the eye? Could superpowers exist in the real world? We've all heard of people lifting a car off of the victim of a car accident, or someone saving a stranger's life based on a premonition. I submit that psychic abilities are real, and our focus today is on ESP, or extrasensory perception. This includes the ability to see faraway places from the comfort of your living room, to look days or weeks into the future, or track down an evasive criminal. You may wonder, what would I do with ESP? Take the gamer approach and set yourself up as the undisputed Gopher Bop champion? Challenge a friend to a game of Battleship and win every time? The reality is, ESP is much more than a game. Imagine being able to view a patient's bloodstream for cancer cells, or mind travel to another planet, search the ocean for sunken treasure, or see into the future. How does remote viewing work? Can it be done while riding a bike? A speeding train? From a ship at sea? From a plane? Or a submarine? What about using remote viewing for profit? By predicting the rise and fall of stock markets, the outcomes of sporting events, or the roll of dice at a casino. These scenarios and others were carried out a few decades ago by the Stanford Research Institute, Delphi Associates, NASA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the CIA. The CIA refers to such experiments as perceptual augmentation techniques. Files that were once top secret have been declassified, giving the public an inside look at the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency's government-sponsored mind research. My guest today is Russell Targ, laser physicist and ESP researcher. Russell began his scientific career in the 1950s as a graduate student in physics at Columbia University. He pioneered the development of the laser, and in 1972, Russell co-founded the Stanford Research Institute's Stargate program, where he spent 10 years conducting remote viewing experiments. Along the way, he designed an ESP teaching machine and pitched his invention to the father of modern rockets, furthered the advancement of non-local consciousness, and accepted an invitation to present his research to a rousing audience at the Kremlin. Russell returned to his optical roots in 1983, conducting laser air turbulence experiments for Lockheed Martin until 1998. Today, Russell continues his work in the scientific field as a consultant and speaker. He is the author of The Reality of ESP, The End of Suffering, Limitless Mind, and a memoir, Do You See What I See? So without further ado, let's welcome Russell to the show. How are you doing today, Russell?
I'm very happy to be with you. I'm always happy to have an opportunity to describe the exciting time we had at Stanford Research Institute during the Cold War. My job as a physicist was to explore the limits, if any, of the remote viewing that was appearing during that period. We're working for the CIA and for NASA, and everyone was very excited that people in the laboratory seemed able to describe what was going on in distant places. That was especially interesting to the CIA, as you might discover. And what we found, the most interesting thing we found, is that people are able to quiet their mind and describe and experience what's going on at a distant location. We call that ability remote viewing, and we found that most people could do it. We had some very talented people, but by and large, anybody who walked into my laboratory was able to do remote viewing pretty well. So it's not limited to a special few people. And the most interesting thing we discovered from a year of working is that the accuracy and the reliability of the remote viewing does not degrade as you look further and further away. That is, we did a lot of activity, psychic hide and go seek, where the subject would sit with me in the laboratory and other people, the general, the colonel, my partner, Hal Putoff, would go hide someplace. And I would say, here we are, John, we're ready to go. Tell me about the surprising images that show up in your awareness.
So there was no aptitude test that you ran first and sort of give you an idea of a person's ability to do this?
In the beginning, we thought that it would be limited to a special few. By the end of the program, we were working with 6 Army recruits that I just chose off the floor of the gymnasium, and they were significant at odds of 1 in a million. So people were very surprised at the good results we had in general. But the important result is that in terms of modern physics, we would call remote viewing a non-local ability. It's definitely independent of the distance. In our experiments in the beginning, we would have people describe, where are you hiding in Palo Alto, as I sit in the laboratory in Menlo Park. And that worked very well. And Ingo Swann was able to look into a future atomic bomb test in China. And he could say, we of course didn't know it was a bomb test. All we're given is coordinates. Here you are, Ingo, tell us what's going to happen at this location 3 days from now. And he said, I see a pyrotechnic display in the sky, and there are a line of trucks, beautiful pyrotechnics. I need colored pencils, I'll draw that. That was enough to tell the CIA that the bomb test they were interested in would take place, but would fail. So Ingo had no problem describing what's going on 3 days in the future, 10,000 miles away. We had a program based on an ESP teaching machine that I invented, and I showed that to Werner von Braun before the program got started, and it was von Braun's very excellent performance with my ESP game that allowed me to meet the administrator of NASA, Jim Fletcher, and got the program started. And you can have my ESP teaching machine free from the Apple Store. It's called ESP Trainer. You can download that and play with it or use it. But the ESP teaching machine was the key to starting our program. What we found with Ingo is that although he could look in China and see into the future, one day when we had our program to teach people how to improve their scores with the ESP teaching machine, my NASA contract monitor asked Ingo, can you take a look at Jupiter? We're going to be having a flyby with the Pioneer leaving shortly. What do you see new in Jupiter? And Ingo said, well, as I take a puff on my cigar, it looks to me like there's a interesting ring of ice crystals all the way around the planet. And George said, oh, you must be thinking of Saturn. And Ingo said, I've been looking at the solar system my entire life. You got to believe me, I know the difference between Jupiter and Saturn. And indeed, 8 months later, when they got pictures back from Jupiter, Ingo was the first person in the world who knew there was a ring of ice crystals around it. And the point of my story is that he had no more trouble describing something 500 million miles away than he did to describe something across the street in Menlo Park or 1,000 miles away, 10,000 miles away in China. The distance did not matter, and the physicists were confident it didn't matter. But there were other people who investigated things, and we had enough data. So we're now even though I'm a physicist, I can still make the outrageous claim that consciousness permeates everything. Now, it doesn't sound like a physics statement, and I'm only a slightly reconciled logical positivist. So that means I really have to see the data, and I'm a reformed logical positivist because I no longer feel I have to burn the believers. That was only in college. But the idea that consciousness permeates everything means that no matter how large or how small your consciousness can be there. And we actually have evidence to go with the 500 million mile case. In the early 1900s, some theosophical researchers, Madame Blavatsky, who was the head of the Theosophical Society, was also a highly intelligent psychic woman, said, "We're now hearing a lot about the periodic table. I think you two," naming Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater, two world-famous psychics at the time, "why don't you take a look at some atoms and we can make a psychic periodic table?" And then, interesting idea. What does it look like psychically? So Leadbeater got a block of paraffin, because paraffin is 99% hydrogen. And he said, as I look at this paraffin, I see these two intersecting triangles representing the hydrogen. And in the corner of each triangle, there's a ball. And I think that's like a fundamental atomic mass in the corner of those. And the balls are held together by bands of energy. And that's what he drew at the beginning of the 20th century. 65 short years later, people began to talk about quarks and gluons. So on the right side of my slide, I show a 21st century drawing of a hydrogen atom, has two up quarks and a down quark connected by gluons. So 100 years after Leadbeater is describing the fundamental atomic units held together by energy, we now have gotten so well educated that they're actually called gluons and quarks. That's the advance we made. But the point is, Leadbeater was the kind of person who could see anything all over the universe, including down to atomic levels. And this is a published document. I got this from the Lucifer magazine, which is a theosophical journal published in 1895, because I wanted to have the original. So in 1895, the proton wasn't discovered until 1919 by Rutherford. Quarks were a century away, but the drawing that Leadbeater made greatly represents what was going to be appearing in books 100 years after he drew that. So that was a remarkable piece of microscopic remote viewing. So it gives you the idea that his consciousness indeed permeates everything. There is no known limit to what you're able to see. So as a physicist, I spent my life doing laser. I'm basically a laser guy. I spent 15 years before my mid-course correction to remote viewing, doing laser stuff. I was the pioneer with the laser. And after I left remote viewing, I was putting lasers on airplanes. I created a remote sensing laboratory at Lockheed. And what we were remote sensing is invisible wind shear and air turbulence. And I could use a powerful laser to see the invisible wind shear. So I've been looking for invisible stuff my whole life. And what we know now, though, the point of this idea is that psychic functioning is not weak and unreliable. Psychic functioning is powerful. And as you'll see in a bit, it was reliable and we could use it for all sorts of things. But here in my little introduction, we're able to use remote viewing to see 500 million miles to Jupiter or all the way into a block of paraffin to see the atomic structure. And this is data that exactly corresponds to the contemporary drawings of a hydrogen atom.
Now, do you know, did NASA ask Ingo Swann if he would take a look at other bodies such as the moon or Mars?
Not as far as I know. We weren't doing that. This was just a one-off. Hesdertz was very supportive of our program, and he was just hanging out with me and Ingo, playing with the ESP teaching machine, which you'll see shortly. And he said, by the way, we're about to launch the Pioneer. Would you take a look at Jupiter? Ingo said, sure, I would. And I'll show you that in a little bit. So here are the four musketeers. You got two laser physicists, a guy from the CIA, and the most psychic person in the world. I bet your ESP allows you to tell who those people are without any further ado. The guy on the left is my colleague Hal Puthoff. He's a laser researcher, PhD from Stanford. The guy with the sunglasses, of course, is CIA contract monitor, Kit Green, who is very supportive of our work. Is a physician, head of LSD, that is to say the Life Science Division at CIA. This leaning tower is me 40 years ago, and the guy on the right is Pat Price, the most psychic man in the world at that time. And we're standing in front of a glider, or near a glider, that we were going to fly around to see if Pat Price was able to see things from inside the glider. And of course, he had no trouble doing that. So here we are in one of our peaceful meeting rooms. The guy on the left is Robert Monroe, who wrote Journeys Out of the Body. And Bob and I were friends before this program because I was interested in this out-of-body research. In fact, I have a lifetime interest in psychic abilities. As a teenager, I was on the stage doing pretend magic. And I did that until I realized that from time to time on stage, I would have a correct impression of the life stream of somebody I was talking to in the audience. And as a young scientist, I became more interested in the real data of parapsychological research than in fooling people doing tricks on the stage. But our contract monitors were very happy that I had a background in magic because they felt that I was less likely to be tricked by a visiting magician. So that all went very well.